Marcus Webb was 39 years old when a man he had never formally met called him, broke to his face in the driveway of his own home. His home, the house he'd re-roofed 3 summers ago and re-poured the front walk on himself because he didn't trust subcontractors with a certain grade of concrete. The man's name was Cortland. He had a haircut that cost money, a watch that cost more, and a jaw that led when he walked. He drove a white Chevy Tahoe with a Hertz barcode in the lower left corner of the windshield. He had been parking it behind Marcus's garage for 4 months. He did not know, had no reason to suspect, had never thought to ask, that the fleet of 17 white Tahoes Cortland's own company rented came from one source, a logistics and fleet management firm called MW Capital Group. MW Capital Group, the initials of Marcus Anthony Webb. The man had been calling him broke while driving his car. Delia stood 2 steps behind Cortland, arms folded, eyes doing the thing they'd been doing for months. Aiming slightly left of Marcus, the way you looked at a wall you were about to knock down. She had practiced this conversation. He could tell by the absence of hesitation. Cortland said, "No offense, brother, but Delia deserves better. Better than someone who's been treading water his whole life." Marcus looked at the barcode in the corner of the windshield for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked at Cortland. He said, "You're probably right." He turned and walked back inside. What Cortland did not know, what neither of them knew, was what Marcus had spent 12 years building before either of them understood how buildings actually worked. What happened next would cost both of them everything they thought they had. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning had started the way most of Marcus's mornings started, which was early and deliberate and without noise. He was in the garage by 5:40, coffee in a thermos, standing at the workbench his grandfather had built from reclaimed Douglas fir sometime in the early 1970s. The bench had survived 2 house moves, a flood, and a divorce that was not Marcus's. Had a slight slope on the right end that he'd corrected twice and stopped correcting after that because the slope had become load-bearing in its own way, part of the system, something the structure had learned to rely on. He was finishing the last section of a credenza he'd been building for 8 months. A black walnut, hand-joined, no fasteners you could see from the front. He had built it for the living room. At the time he started, the living room had been a different kind of room. One Delia had painted herself, one they had argued about furniture placement in, one that still held in his memory the smell of the paint she'd used and the way she'd laughed when she got a streak of antique linen on his forearm. He ran a hand along the top panel. His grandfather had told him once, sitting at this same bench, that the measure of a man's work was not how it looked on the day it was finished, but how it held up when nobody was watching. "Built right is built right," he'd said, without looking up from whatever he was fixing. The world doesn't have to see it for it to be true. Marcus picked up his thermos and took a long pull of coffee. He heard Delia moving through the kitchen above him. Her footsteps had changed in the past year. They used to cross the kitchen and come to the top of the garage stairs, brief and checking in, a small habit of proximity. Now they moved in other directions, toward the back hallway, toward the bedroom, toward the phone she had started keeping face down on every flat surface in the house. She appeared in the kitchen doorway when he came upstairs at 6:15, already dressed, already somewhere else in her head. She kissed his cheek the way you kissed a piece of furniture goodbye, asked if he wanted eggs. He said he was fine. She nodded and looked at something on her phone and nodded again at whatever it said. The phone tilted slightly as she set it face down on the counter. He had noticed the tilting 6 months ago. He had not mentioned it once. He had met Delia at a trade conference in Charlotte 11 years ago. She was working procurement for a mid-sized construction firm. He was 3 years into building MW Capital Group from a logistics consulting contract he'd won out of pure stubbornness and a half-page business plan he'd written at a Waffle House. She was sharp in a way that didn't announce itself, asked good questions, didn't perform for the room. He had followed her out to the parking lot after the closing dinner on some combination of instinct and bravery, and told her he thought she was the most capable person in the room, and he'd like to learn more about how she thought about things. She had laughed and said, "That's an unusual approach." He'd said, "I'm an unusual person." She'd given him her card. For 3 years it had been the truest thing about his life. He was locking the garage when the notification came in. Not on the phone he carried openly, the mid-range Samsung with the cracked corner protector, but on the second phone, the one he kept in the inner pocket of his worksite jacket, the one his financial attorney and his operations director, and precisely no one else had the number for. Single-line alert from a flag he'd set on a joint account Delia didn't know he monitored separately. A transfer, $11,400, to an account he didn't recognize. He stood in the side yard for a moment, the morning still and gray around him, the coffee gone cold in his thermos. Then he went back inside. He did not confront her. He knew better than to confront before he understood. His grandfather had taught him that too, though not in so many words. What he'd taught him was the shape of it, the patience that let you see, clearly, the discipline that separated knowing from reacting. You didn't pour a footing until you understood the soil. You didn't frame a wall until you knew what the wall was meant to hold. He sat in his truck in the parking lot of an Ace Hardware for 45 at that afternoon, with his laptop open on the passenger seat and a months-old bank's statement in his lap. He had accessed the joint account through the financial portal he'd set up when they married. One Delia, used through a simplified interface he had, with professional precision never once mentioned, had a parallel administrative view. He was not proud of this. He had built it not for surveillance, but for the same reason he kept a spare set of keys to every property he owned. Because things happened. Because he was the kind of man who understood what it cost to be unprepared. He started at the beginning. His hands didn't shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. The first transfer he found was small. 18 months ago, $300 flagged as a vendor payment to an account ending in 7741. Cross-referenced the vendor code against his business records. It did not appear. 3 weeks later, another transfer, $600, same account. Then a gap of 5 weeks, then $700. The pattern was not random. It was paced, the rhythm of someone who had done the math on what would pass unnoticed, on what fell below the threshold of a second look. He went back further. He pulled every statement from the joint account going back 3 years and went through them in reverse chronological order, tating each line in a spreadsheet he opened in a second window. The first year was clean. The second year had 3 small anomalies. Vendor codes he recognized, but payment amounts that were 11 to 14% higher than contracted. He noted them. He kept going. By the time Marcus reached the most recent statement, he had counted 26 transactions over 19 months. Total, $82,300, drawn from an account that was technically joint, but functionally funded by him, because he was the one who moved money into it monthly to cover household expenses, because Delia's income had been inconsistent since she'd left the construction firm 2 years ago to start a consulting business that had not, by any metric he could document, produced income. He sat with that number for a while, $82,300. He photographed the screen with his secondary phone. He forwarded 3 key statements to his own encrypted email. He downloaded the transaction log as a CSV and saved it to a folder he kept on a drive that was not connected to any network Delia could access. He pulled up the Hertz Fleet account, the account his company maintained, the one that served 17 corporate clients in 3 states, the account from which 4 months ago a white Tahoe had been issued to a Cortland Reeves of Reeves Group Properties on a corporate billing arrangement Marcus had personally approved without knowing who Cortland Reeves was in any other context. He pulled up Cortland's LinkedIn. He read it carefully. He noted the photo. He noted the title. He noted the company, the tenure, the headshot. He searched the name in 3 county property databases. He found 2 residential addresses and a commercial listing in Huntersville. He found a civil judgment from 2019 and a second one from 2022. He found a deed. It took him 23 seconds to find the name on it. He looked at the document for a long time, not from disbelief, from measurement. The way you looked at a load-bearing wall after someone told you it wasn't structural, and you ran the numbers yourself. The numbers confirmed what you had already half known since the moment you walked in the room. She had put her name on a mortgage with another man. A year ago last March, he opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it simply Reeves. Then he made one phone call. "Patricia," he said when she answered, "I need you to clear your calendar Friday morning." Patricia Hollis had been Marcus's attorney for 6 years. She was 61, kept her hair natural and short, and had the kind of quiet competence that operated without announcement. She had handled 3 of his property acquisitions, the incorporation of MW Capital Group's second operating entity, a contractor dispute that had briefly made a local business journal. She did not flinch at things meant to make people flinch. She reviewed the printed statements he slid across her conference table and said nothing for 4 minutes. When she looked up, expression was the expression of someone taking inventory after a fire. $82,000, she said, and this is the joint account only. Do you have reason to believe there are other accounts? He slid a second folder across the table. She opened it. He watched her read. The second folder contained screenshots from a financial platform he had accessed through credentials. Delia had stored in a shared password manager, back when shared meant something. She had opened a personal account 14 months ago. The deposits pointed somewhere specific, property in Huntersville, a 2-bedroom condo, listed under her name and a co-applicant. The co-applicant's name was Cortland James Reeves. Patricia set the folder down. She put her name on a mortgage. It was not a question. A year ago last March. She's been exiting the marriage, Patricia said. This isn't impulse. This is architecture. Marcus nodded once. North Carolina has specific provisions about marital waste. Transfers from joint marital assets to third-party accounts for the purpose of benefiting a romantic partner constitute actionable dissipation. Combined with the condo, we are looking at full recovery plus interest. Depending on how she filed the joint return last year, she paused and let that sit. Potentially more. She placed her hands flat on the table. Marcus, you are not the one in trouble here. He picked up his coffee cup. Set it back down without drinking from it. I know. She gave him one more thing before he left. Your grandfather built the Devane Center on South Boulevard, she said as he was standing to go. I grew up 4 blocks from it. My mother used to take me to the rec programs there. A pause. You are exactly what I would have expected from that. He gathered his things and walked out. Real power operated in quiet rooms. There was a man named Clarence Webb who lived on Archdale Drive and had, 74, still not learned to use a television remote with more than 6 buttons. He had worked 31 years at a water utility and invested consistently in things people called too modest. He owned 4 properties outright. He did not talk about this. Marcus drove to Archdale Drive on Saturday morning. His uncle opened the door before Marcus could knock, the way he always had. A small act of attentiveness Marcus had grown up understanding as love. Sat on the back porch with coffee and did not rush anything. She been distant, Clarence said eventually. It was not a question. For about 2 years. I noticed at Easter. He looked at the yard. I didn't say anything because it wasn't mine to say. Marcus told him the shape of it. Not the numbers. His uncle didn't need those. He needed the structure, and Marcus gave it to him. Clarence listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, a mockingbird in the back oak ran through 3 different calls and started a 4th. She ever ask you about the business? Clarence said. The real business, what it's worth. No. His uncle looked at him. Not once in 11 years. No. Clarence set his cup down. A woman who loves a man wants to know him, all of him. The part that worries, the part that works, the part that built something. He paused. She never asked because she didn't think there was anything there worth asking about. He picked his cup back up. That's not your fault. That's her vision problem. Marcus drove home. He kissed Delia's cheek when he came through the door. He asked about her day. He sat across from her at dinner and answered her questions and laughed once at something she said. She performed her half with the fluency of someone who had been practicing. He performed his half with the fluency of someone who understood load-bearing structures. The folder on his desktop now held joint account statements annotated by Patricia's paralegal, the Huntersville condo deed, a summary from his forensic accountant flagging 3 years of personal expenses. Delia had routed through his business returns without his knowledge. A fleet report showing Cortland had received 4 months of corporate rentals at a 22% discount, and a photograph, time-stamped, from the doorbell camera he'd installed 18 months ago and never mentioned, of Cortland letting himself into Marcus's home with a key on a keymaw. Tuesday afternoon, his own house, his own key. He ate the dinner Delia had made. He thanked her for it. Preparation is the work. By Wednesday, Patricia had filed 3 preliminary motions and retained a forensic accountant to formalize the dissipation analysis. By Thursday, she had made 2 calls Marcus was briefed on afterward. The first was to Cortland Reeves's business attorney. The second was to the licensing board overseeing Delia's consulting credentials, submitting documentation that 3 clients had paid Delia's firm for services rendered by licensed professionals. Credentials Delia had allowed to lapse without disclosure. By Friday, the number on the table had changed. It was no longer 82,000. It was 137,000 when you added the business impropriety. 161,000 when you added the estimated fleet discount. Not 4 months, but 4 years, because Patricia's accountant had found evidence that Reeves Group Properties had been routing vehicle rentals through Marcus's corporate account since before Cortland and Delia had met through an intermediary. Delia had introduced without his knowledge. Patricia had also contacted the Huntersville mortgage lender and asked, very professionally, that they review the co-applicant's income documentation because the figures referenced a salary that no verified record supported. Reeves Group Properties had 2 outstanding civil judgments from Mecklenburg County and a Better Business Bureau file containing 11 complaints over 4 years. Cortland Reeves was not a man who had built things. He was a man who had learned to stand next to things other people built and wait for the right moment to put his name on them. Marcus had always understood the difference. He was 3 steps ahead. He chose the morning of October 3rd because the weather was clear and because Patricia had said the paperwork would be ready and because it was, according to his records, exactly 19 months to the day from the first transfer. He let Delia call Cortland. He had known she would. He had known because he had left one specific piece of information visible, a folder on the kitchen counter, the name Reeves on the tab, just projecting enough from beneath a stack of mail to be noticed but not obviously placed. Delia found it at 7:40 in the morning. She was on the phone within 4 minutes. By 8:15, Cortland's white Tahoe was in the driveway. Marcus was in the kitchen when they came inside, both of them moving with the particular energy of people who believe they have arrived first at a conversation. Delia had the folder open. Cortland had his jaw leading. They had clearly talked through what they were going to say and how they were going to say it, which Marcus found instructive because it confirmed what he'd known for months. This had been coordinated for a long time. Patricia was already seated at the kitchen table. A woman Marcus did not know was sitting beside Patricia. Her name was Audra Glenn. She was a CPA and a notarized forensic examiner, and she had in front of her a 31-page document that she had helped prepare, and that she would, if asked, testify to in any court in the state. Delia stopped when she saw them. Cortland said, "What is this?" Marcus, "Sit down." Something in his voice, not its volume, because its volume had not changed, but its quality, a particular density, a weight that did not perform itself, made Cortland sit. Marcus placed the first document in front of Delia. He did not slide it. He placed it. Precisely. "This is the dissipation analysis," he said. 82,000 from the joint account. The forensic examiner has annotated each transaction. Every transfer to account ending in 7741 is highlighted. That account, as you know, is Cortland's operating account for Reeves Group Properties. Patricia will explain. This constitutes marital waste under North Carolina statute, and we will be seeking full recovery in the settlement. Delia's mouth opened. She closed it. He placed the second document. "This is the Huntersville condo deed. Your name, his name, a mortgage application signed 14 months ago. The income documentation on this application has been referred to the Mortgage Lenders Compliance Department. There are numbers on this form that do not correspond to numbers that exist anywhere in any verified record. Patricia's team has preserved copies." Cortland said, "Now hold on." Patricia said quietly, "Mr. Reeves." He stopped. The third document was the fleet report. Marcus laid it down last. He tapped the total on the bottom of the final page with one finger. "This is your rental history. 4 years. Discounted corporate rate billed to my account. This was not authorized. This was not disclosed. The outstanding balance, plus the corrected rate for all prior rentals, is being invoiced to Reeves Group Properties today. You will receive the invoice by email this afternoon." He looked at Cortland directly, the way you looked at load calculations before you signed off on them. "You called me broke," Marcus said, "in my driveway, in front of my house, while you were standing next to a vehicle my company owns." Cortland's jaw was no longer leading. "MW Capital Group," Marcus said, "manages fleet services for 41 corporate clients across 3 states. Holds equity positions in 7 commercial properties in the greater Charlotte metro, including the building where 2 of Reeves Group Properties' vendor accounts are registered. We also hold the note on the equipment lease for the storage facility in Concord that your company has been using since 2021. He paused. "You have been operating inside the infrastructure I built for 4 years," he said, "and you had no idea." Delia said softly, "Marcus." His mother-in-law, who had been sitting at the far end of the table since before anyone arrived, invited there by Marcus 2 days earlier and present now without ceremony, looked at her daughter and said, with the flatness of a woman who had run out of patience in a very specific way. Delia went quiet. Marcus gathered the original copies of the documents, stacked them, and handed the stack to Patricia. He picked up his coffee mug. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "The divorce filing is already submitted," he said. "You'll receive service today or tomorrow. Patricia has my contact information. Any further communication about the settlement should go through her." He looked once at Delia. She was looking back at him. For the first time in months, she was looking directly at him, not slightly to the left. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'm clear. Those are different things." He walked through the kitchen and out the side door into the October morning. He did not look back. The room was silent behind him. 7 months passed like water over a good pour. Marcus's mornings still started early, but the house was different now, quieter in a way that turned out not to be absence but space. He had finished the black walnut credenza and moved it to the new house. 4-bedroom craftsman he'd bought 2 years earlier as an investment and renovated by hand over 14 months. Bamboo floors throughout. Kitchen he'd designed himself, with a window over the sink that looked into a side yard where he had planted a Japanese maple in the first week of spring. He went out every morning and put his hand on it. It was doing fine. He had promoted 2 people at MW Capital Group and brought on a 3rd operating partner. He had signed a contract in the spring that would expand his fleet operations into South Carolina and Virginia. The number attached to that contract had 7 figures in it, and when his accountant showed it to him, Marcus had looked at it for a moment and then asked if the coffee was fresh. He had met Renee at a neighborhood association meeting he'd nearly skipped. She was an environmental engineer with a voice that moved carefully and eyes that noticed things before she commented on them. She asked him once, 3 weeks in, what he was actually like when nobody was watching. He had thought about it for a longer time than most people would have expected before answering. She had waited without rushing him. That was the moment he understood something about her that he didn't need to say out loud. She was reading on the back porch when he came outside with his coffee. On the Saturday morning, he heard about Delia. The information came through his uncle Clarence, who had heard it through a woman at his church whose daughter worked in property management. Delia's consulting credentials had not been reinstated. The licensing board had opened a formal review. The Huntersville condo, it turned out, gone into default 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. The mortgage had been, in large part, supported by payments that were no longer flowing from Marcus's accounts. Delia was renting a 1-bedroom apartment in Concord and working an administrative position at a medical billing company. Cortland Reeves had relocated to Columbia, South Carolina, after Reeves Group Properties lost its 2 largest vendor contracts, both of which had been registered at the building MW Capital Group held equity in, and settled the invoice from Marcus's fleet company for 64 cents on the dollar because 64 cents was apparently what the math allowed for. Two of Cortland's previous business partners had come forward as part of the lender's compliance review. There was a separate civil matter pending. Marcus did not follow it closely. He had heard all of this without asking for any of it. He noted it. He moved on. The Japanese maple had 3 new branches. Renee looked up from her book, and he brought her a cup of coffee without being asked, because he had noticed 3 weeks ago what she took in it, and he had been making it that way since. He sat down. The morning came in slow and clean over the yard. He had built everything worth keeping. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.